Hello, and welcome to this Brand Square webinar featuring SGK's SVP of Client Engagement of Americas, Michael Leeds, and VP of Client Engagement, Bruce Levinson, as they present off the starting block, making the most of the new FDA label regulations. My name is Stephanie Krieger, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we get started, I would like to cover some housekeeping items. This webinar is interactive, so we encourage you to submit questions at any time during the presentation using the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. We will be monitoring the questions and will address them at the end of the presentation. We will also record this webinar for future viewing, and we'll send out a link to the recording in the coming weeks. Please join in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag BrandSquare. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Michael and Bruce.
Thank you, and good morning, afternoon, and evening. My name is Michael Leeds, and I'm joined by Bruce Levinson, and we're here today for the Brand Square session discussing opportunities for making the most of the new FDA label regulations. For those of you who are new to this type of environment, this is a 30-minute session that will include about 20 to 25 minutes of presentation, followed by, as Stephanie said, your questions at the end. So let's get started. Since we've all been waiting about 2 years, and on the next slide, we'll be able to see the first question that we're going to respond to, which is about what can we learn? For the last 2 years, the FDA has been considering, debating, reviewing, hearing from people, constituents, organizations, and they've finally spoken on this topic. The pathway's been set, the race to compliance and competitive advantage has begun, and to that end, we've reached out to clients across our network to get a sense of how companies are thinking about the new regulations. And what we hope to do in today's session is to share with you what those thoughts and actions are, particularly since they cover a number of important perspectives regarding the brand owner, their supply chain, of course, regulatory issues, and that of the consumer. So let's start with some background information. And although we have covered on prior Brand Square sessions some of the key changes, we want to circle back here for a little bit just to remind people of the scope and the scale and the impact of this initiative, as it could easily range from a simple relabeling to a complex reformulation, repackaging, or potentially even brand positioning. So for reference, this initiative is going to touch over 700,000 SKUs. And while the compliance date is set for the end of 2018 for companies with $10 million of revenue per year or more, there is still a little bit of clarification needed to be around the meaning of compliance. Is that on shelf? Is that in the supply chain? And what the FDA means by as it enters interstate commerce. So there'll be some more information and clarification coming from the FDA on that. But you'll also notice that there's some new call-outs, such as added sugar, as well as revised definitions that relate to the way that dietary fiber is calculated. So in short, there are quite a few changes whose impact on the nutritional label will certainly influence a number of other areas of interest to both marketers and consumers, and that will ultimately appear either on the front of pack or on the principal display panel. So let's go to the next slide and we'll see a little bit more about what's going on with the FDA and its rationale. Because this initiative is really the first large step since the NLEA was introduced 20 years ago, and since then, the rules have only modestly been tweaked over the last 20 years. So the FDA's rationale for the changes that we have in front of us now are based on updated science, an increased focus on health and transparency, and certainly consumer education. So bringing forward that idea that nutritional information being easy to understand will help clients make more informed choices about their food consumption is what the FDA has been putting forward as the rationale. And if folks have the opportunity to make more informed decisions, it should have not only a positive impact on their health and well-being, but also an overall cost reduction in the healthcare. And that's exactly how it was justified to Congress in the economic evaluation of the rules. So at this point, we'll ask Bruce to start sharing with us what we've been seeing in the market.
Thanks, Michael. So as Michael said, we've been living with this for some time, expecting the change. There's been a lot written about the coming change to the label, and now it's finally here. So what we've done is we've asked some of our clients and companies that we work with who are involved in food and beverage and nutritional supplements a few questions. And what we want to do now is give you the answers to those questions, how the companies responded to them. We'll dig a little bit deeper and offer some additional thoughts of our own. And I think as we go through some of what we've learned, it'll paint a little bit of a picture for you and your own organization to take back hopefully some insights, some ideas, or even gauge your own preparedness versus some other companies in the same space. So the first question that we have asked is very simple. What have companies already started to do? And we'll go through some of the responses. Some companies have said, well, nothing yet. It's early, and they're really just organizing themselves, and some haven't even started. Other companies have gone a little bit further, and the first things that we typically see are they've organized a team, often a cross-functional team. And the reason I say cross-functional is we know that for some period of time it was probably legal or regulatory that was most involved in this, understanding the regulations, seeing what was being published, understanding the implications. Now it's really important that all the other constituents across your organization start to get involved as well. Budgets, obviously budgets as well. So you've got you have people resources, and you've got financial resources. And then some companies said, well, we've begun discussions about how to prioritize our SKUs, and we're gonna dig a little bit deeper on this one. And once the team gets together, that's typically a pretty important next step in terms of what that team is going to be discussing. So what can we learn from some of these reactions? And I'll go through a couple of points. The first is that companies are at very different stages. Now it's early, so it's not time if you're ahead of the pack to start celebrating or feel too proud. There's still a long journey ahead of us. Likewise, if you're one of those companies that said we haven't gotten started yet, it's okay. It is time, but you've joined this webcast, and so you've obviously taken an interest. The second thing is organizing that team, getting people energized, getting people focused on this, and starting the conversation within your organization is really important. It feels like we've all been discussing FDA for a long time. Now that it's here, we want to make sure that people realize it's really here and we're on the clock. Okay, so it's time to take it seriously again across all the relative and relevant departments. Once that team is together, the budget is obviously something that we saw, and I want to be clear on this one. The budget, obviously, it covers the cost involved, but there are considerations that go beyond just the cost of this change. I'll give you an example. If your budget is to cover this at the expense of other activities that you might otherwise do during that compliance window, well, that's going to have an impact on any other graphics changes, new product launches, line extensions. You want to make sure that that's well understood in the organization. If this is an incremental budget and it's on top of all those things I just mentioned, you also want to make sure that the human resources are available, that your partners, your agencies, the whole supply chain is organized in that way. So that budget actually drives a lot of knock-on decisions that carry forward. And then the last one is about determining the key priorities. And I would say at this stage, it might be early to expect any company to say, here's our priority list, sort of from top to bottom. Maybe there's a company out there that's already done that, I don't know. But I think it is important to decide how you are going to decide what goes first. Getting that objective criteria to make decisions. There are going to be competing thoughts. You want to minimize obsoletes. You want to touch packs just once. You want to align any other activities that are happening at the same time. So those are some of the thought starters that teams are looking at once they're organized together, the budget and the prioritization. So that gives you a sense of the first question. Michael, I'll turn it back to you to cover the second question.
Thank you, Bruce. And the second question can really be framed up as either opportunities or challenges. We're asking clients and companies what have been some early adapters of the new label regulations, some of the challenges that they have faced. So on the next slide, we'll start looking at some of those challenges. And the first, that being around of priorities and expectations, and particularly that around time. Some of the responses that we have heard, and also others that we've read, were around needing more time. Companies have gone on record saying they need 3 or 4 years. Other ones we have heard have been asking for some lengthy extensions. And all of this really implies back to us that there may be an opportunity to streamline processes and optimize their budgets by bundling the changes and really revisiting the cadence of their packaging activities, because it's unlikely there are going to be wide scale at this point extensions provided to everybody involved in the process. We know that companies with revenue less than 10 million a year have 3 years to be compliant, but certainly no major activities taking place, although we're aware of companies certainly working with their lobbying organizations to try to put pressure on the FDA to reconsider some of these timelines. The next area of comments and feedback that we've heard were around templates, which were just recently published, but when the rules were initially announced, were only provided through guidance in the narrative. So during the first few weeks after the regulations were posted, the production templates, the style guides, if you will, that we've become used to having for nutritional and supplemental information were actually not yet created. So the only points of reference, which did exist in terms of spacing and leading and font size, were in narrative form and embedded within the 259 pages of the final rules that were posted in the Federal Register. So, as you can imagine, distilling those words into graphic guidelines at the beginning of the race, if you will, seemed a bit daunting to many. And in fact, they were necessary to become more easily visualized. And only as of a few weeks ago, the FDA had provided some additional guidance for folks to follow. But theoretically, based on what we've seen in the past, there'll be more tweaks and adjustments being brought forward as companies ask for additional guidance. Now, the last two comments really go together. And that's where we see companies first trying to understand what the requisite nutritional data is, therefore asking their food scientists to go through and, in essence, rerun the numbers. Let's look at dietary fiber. Let's look at vitamin D. Let's look at how much added sugar is in the product, so that the marketers can then really assess what, if any, other changes need to be made and therefore should be considered in the planning process. So on the next slide, we'll look at some of the key takeaways related to these comments. The first one, where 2 years may not sound like enough time, that's unlikely going to change. The one thing that money can't buy is time, as we know, and time is going to be of the essence. We certainly understand that there are activities that take place, but as companies look at the initiative, they look at their SKUs, they ought to be considering the annual cadence of the portfolio touches and budget their time, their resources, which can often be a bottleneck, and their funds accordingly. As we look at the second takeaway from this group, seeking the right resource is key. We're encouraging companies to rely on their graphics partner to provide updates to those templates along the way. We've seen over the last 20 years that the FDA is approachable. They periodically do allow exceptions, and we certainly expect companies to be seeking those exceptions and amplifications along the way. So having a partner that has resources focused on understanding what they are and how they need to appear graphically on the side of package and portrayed in the nutrition information is going to be extremely critical. And we get on to the third recommendation, and that's all around organizational awareness. Clearly, there are people that know a lot. There are folks that are just getting on board and exposed to this information. But certainly with the tools that exist today that include your own intranet, Yammer, other chat tools, certainly physical comps that can provide the before and the after look in terms of nutritional information and how much of that information may need to bleed off into a different panel, all relevant, as well as information sessions, perhaps lunch and learns or marketing town halls, are all effective ways to increase organizational awareness to help stage-gate understand, prioritize what's in front of the organization so that the resources can be harnessed to make the compliance date at the end of 2018 in the month of July. The last step is around expect challenges. It sounds pretty simple, but expect the unexpected. There are going to be some categories likely to see enormous changes, whether it's related to vitamin D or dietary fiber or added sugar, the size of the portions. These can easily be considered opportunities as well. So look for an ability to maintain agility, some flexibility, and the ability to pivot within your supply chain. Get forward-looking on the information, and at the same time, consider how technologies and processes and initiatives such as the Smart Label initiative or what Digimart can bring to bear can help play in your solution set as you invest now, but can certainly set up the brand and the package for long-term viable success. So that's the long and short of the second question about what can we learn from these challenges, and then we'll turn it back to Bruce for the third of the three questions.
Thanks, Michael. So we looked at what companies are starting to do, and we looked about some of the challenges. I get the opportunity to talk about potential growth ideas, and we are seeing some of this in the market. One company came out and said, yes, we see a new competitive claim that we can make versus our closest competitor. And we're going to do it on pack. We're going to do it throughout the marketing mix. Really interesting that the new regulation is changing the playing field. It's actually something new for the market that companies are all needing to respond to. And that's going to create winners and losers. Certain categories may be at a better advantage, and certain brands will be at a better advantage. And of course, the opposite is true. So some companies are very excited about that, and they're seizing the moment. Most recently, I think Kind Bars has entered the conversation around added sugars. They've reformulated. They have a whole campaign around it before the new label is even introduced. They know that this is part of the discussion, and it's going to be with us moving forward, certainly in a very big way. What else are companies doing? Well, someone says, actually, we see a serious risk with some of our products, right? That's the flip side. We need to either reformulate or repackage, or both. This is a company that's saying we're not just going to accept the fact that there's new information going on the pack. We're going to proactively change the way the product is packed to manage serving size, or reformulate if maybe there's more calories or sodium or sugar or whatever it may be that the consumer might want to see in that product. Taking a proactive stance. Third, well, they're going to save money by doing a graphics restage at the same time as we change the labels. And this is an interesting one. So much of your brand portfolio you may be touching, right, over the course of a year or maybe every other year. But there are those paths that haven't been touched in a while. And perhaps it's time to remove an old claim or update some imagery or bring some new stylistic elements to the pack while you're doing that. So there's an opportunistic element right there. And then the last one is, as a healthy brand, we're excited to get out there first and show our consumer that we're leaders in label transparency. Not every brand will be in that position, but I think for brands that have a great story to tell, while there's more PR and sort of buzz around what's happening with nutrition, with labeling, with clean packaging, this is a great opportunity to prioritize those products, and you're starting to see that be part of the conversation. So digging a bit deeper, number one, seize the moment. This is the point that I just made, which is, look, the regulation has given us this gift, right, which is, it doesn't feel like a gift necessarily. I know it's a lot of hard work, but we do have the opportunity to make new claims, to leverage those claims, and to do it across the marketing mix where it makes sense. Second, think about those broader implications. As brands are increasingly looking to packaging as an always-on channel to break through the clutter, right? Advertising has gotten harder and harder to reach consumers. Consumers are in control, right? It's well documented. So that pack has got to work really hard in terms of telegraphing what the brand stands for to tell its story. Well, now if you get a label that's got to go on that pack, and maybe it covers more real estate than the prior label, maybe it's a dual column label, that's going to impact just how hard that structure and graphics of your packaging need to work for your brand. So this is a great time to explore those kinds of packs that are most heavily impacted. It's a lot of packs that are most heavily impacted, and start to see what you can do from a creative standpoint. Third, timing matters. So beyond all of the supply chain logistics, all of the budgeting constraints, again, the timing of when you go out will influence some of the consumer perception. We talked about a healthy brand leading that charge. If you're late to the game, what does that say about your brand? In some cases, it may be very little. In some cases, depending on your competitive set, that could send a message. It's worth a thought. And the fourth point is to thoroughly evaluate the deeper decisions. The really big one and the hardest one, I think, is about, do you reformulate or do you repackage? And it's a bit of a wargaming exercise to understand not just what's right for your brand, but what will your competitor do? What are you going to look like on the shelf next to your nearest competitor? So it's a great time to do some comping, to do some different scenarios, mock things up, get consumers involved, do some research, so that you have time to, on the executional side, to actually implement the leading change. So that provides a couple of the thoughts and questions we ask our clients and companies in this space. What we want to do in this section before we open it up for questions is just offer a few additional considerations that companies are thinking about with respect to FDA, because even outside of this regulation, there are some important considerations on the fringe. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bruce. And let's jump into the first one, which is the use of the word natural, which would seem to be fairly unadulterated by interpretation, but in fact that does not happen to be the case. Companies have been fined for misusing the word natural, because today natural is only defined by what it's not, either artificial or synthetic. So the FDA did a pretty smart thing. They opened up the opportunity for comments from industry, from commerce, from manufacturers, from the consumers, ourselves, and they've asked whether it's appropriate first to define the term natural, and if so, how should they define the term natural, and then finally how the agency should determine how the term natural is used on food labels. So the comment period just closed in May. There were close to 7,700 comments received, and the FDA is now thinking about its position and its desire to get involved with natural and bringing that forward. And for sure, the companies that have been fined millions of dollars are going to greatly appreciate a little more clarity around the word natural. Moving along, we also have all heard and been part of the GMO conversation, and most recently the federal law in essence preempted Vermont state law. But what's important here is that the Vermont law was principally advocated for in the name of transparency and consumers having the right to know more about what's in their food that they are consuming. So consumer transparency is important. It will remain important. The regulatory and legal environment will change and does change. So let's take advantage of that and see what these changes may offer. As we look to the next slide, in terms of digital connectivity, some of the offerings are going to be unintended side effects. So think about the GMA Smart Label initiative that could potentially be aided by the federal government's GMO law. Because when you think about where now the GMO information can be displayed, it no longer has to just be on pack. So in turn, the data sets for nutritional and GMO information, if combined with other brand content, can be served up in a number of ways, thereby bringing additional tools and touch points to brand owners, which at the end of the day is a pretty good thing. And then finally, on the next slide, there are some key learnings from our brethren over in Europe. They went through something similar. It's called EU 1169. And like the 4 Ps of classical marketing, there are really 5 Ps for this initiative, which is prior planning prevents poor performance. So don't wait till the last minute, because there may be some inventory implications that turn out to be quite expensive in terms of depleting what's around. And then with any opportunities, approaching it through thorough planning, selecting the right partner, certainly one that has the process knowledge and the capacity will help deliver and drive that consistency and efficiency. So with everything that we've discussed, we realize we're still in the early stages. New regulations and better understanding of existing regulations will certainly come forward.
Thanks, Michael. So just summarizing the content we shared, and then we'll have a couple of minutes for a few questions. I think the key takeaways are: look, it's early days, but leading companies are getting started. They're assembling teams. They're creating awareness within their organization. They're identifying budgets, and they're considering things like prioritizing SKUs, potential new claims, and threats to their business. So those are all things that you can start to mobilize within your own organization, and I'm sure that you will be well suited for the compliance window of the next 2 years or so. What we're going to do now is I'm going to refer to the chat feature and answer your questions. I want to keep us on time, so we may limit it a little bit in terms of the number of questions. If we don't get to yours, please visit Label Central. There's a URL on your screen right here. You can certainly get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to, we'd love to engage with you on your ideas and any questions you may have. I do see the first question coming through. Thank you. So this is a question for me. It says, can you speak more to the always-on channel of packaging being impacted? Right. So this was a point around the pack needing to work very hard for brands, particularly heritage brands that have perhaps been built on broadcast advertising and now the consumer being in control, the pack really needs to do more of a job in breaking through the clutter. I think this is where a really keen focus on design, be it structural design, graphic design, will be really important. If that nutrition facts label occupies more real estate and you are not able or as able to tell your story, you want to make sure that you understand that. It's a great time to do some mock-ups and see what that might look like, and reconsider your approach to design to drive more of an impact with the pack, as well as potentially off-pack connectivity and using that pack to drive messaging in other aspects of the marketing mix. So thank you for the question. I do see another question, which was for Michael. It says, what are some good ways for companies to control costs during this process? Michael, you want to take that one?
Sure. As costs, I'm sure, are top of mind for most organizations, if not all. I would say that the planning is definitely going to be key. When you think about what needs to take place, the fact that there is an existing cadence of business and throughput of package changes, understanding what your workflows are, certainly understanding the capabilities and bandwidth both internally for the folks responsible in the supply chain for creating and gathering the nutritional information, obviously from your supply chain partners in the area of bandwidth and efficiency and speed and agility. All those will be important. So you'll want to work closely together, create a task team, if you will. You want to schedule priority items to help reduce, number one, the inefficiency related to inappropriate timing as well as lack of communication. You want to identify products and obsolescence so that there's no write-down of inventory, and then learn from what we have recently seen in the GMO labeling, that really getting an understanding of the SKUs, the order and priority with which they need to be addressed are all important factors in understanding and assessing the implications with which you can put volume efficiently through the pipeline. And I think taking a step back and looking at it from a holistic point of view and really putting together that task team, having somebody in charge calling the ball, will help people minimize costs and get the most out of their money.
Great. I do see we're just coming up on time, so thank you for participating in the Brand Square. As I said, if we didn't get to your question, please do use the URL or get in touch with Michael or myself directly. Thanks, and good luck with your FDA endeavors. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Michael and Bruce, for that very informative presentation. And thank you all for joining us. As a reminder, you'll be receiving an email with a link to the video recording of this webinar. And be sure to visit brandsquare.com to register for next month's webinar with Larry Logan, Digimarc's Chief Marketing Officer, as he presents winning customer loyalty through digitally empowered packaging. Thank you and have a great day.